This is PIPCast.
Hello, my name's Craig Griffiths.
And hello, my name is Justin Blackett.
And this is PIPCast, a podcast for ODPs in the theatre world.
I can imagine the first question you're going to ask yourself, why on earth is it called PIPCast?
Well, we don't have a good reason, but we do have a reason. It turns out it is very difficult to name a podcast.
We've spent the last year, quite literally, scratching our heads trying to work out a name for this podcast. And we'll tell you shortly what this whole podcast is all about. But having a name to put some context to the podcast was very, very difficult.
So what we did is we took the three phases of theatre, the pre-operative, intra-operative and post-operative part, and shortened it to PIP, the PIPcast, the entire operative process in a podcast form. Again, we were potentially going to put that as our format, but that probably won't work inevitably as it evolves.
And as you can imagine, once that kind of name sticks, it literally does stick. And so since then, we've been addressing this podcast as the PIPcast. And I think you would all agree that it does work.
So, what is this podcast for? We're looking to be a voice for ODPs, to talk to ODPs, to help talk about the operating theatre world in a way that we don't currently have access to.
One of the beauties of the operating department is that we get to work with such a multitude of different disciplines. So we didn't want to make it completely exclusive just for ODPs, but this is led by two very handsome looking ODPs.
Who are we? Again, as I said, I'm Craig Griffiths. I am an ODP currently working as an anaesthetic and recovery assistant at the Children's Hospital in Bristol. I have been qualified for around 2 years, fairly newly qualified. I did my training in Morriston, Swansea. Big up the Morriston crew. Before that, I was a NA in theatres at St Michael's Hospital in Bristol as well. And at Southmead Hospital, I worked in sterile services. So I've literally taken every single step I can through the ranks of the perioperative journey.
And that leaves down to me. So my name is Justin Blackett. I've been an ODP a little bit longer than Craig, and I started my work in theatres back in 1998, where I spent about 3 years being, hopefully, a very good healthcare assistant in the vascular theatres at Derriford Hospital. And like every good NA, at some point a sister who's in charge of you takes you aside and said, look, Justin, you need to go off and become an ODP. And of course I did. I trained at Plymouth. I spent about a year there working very well in anaesthetics. And then I found love and then moved up to Bristol, where clearly I've now got married and I'm very happy. But then I worked as an ODP at North Bristol and then moved across to UH Bristol to predominantly work at the Bristol Children's Hospital. I spent a short time there doing anaesthetics and recovery as a band 5, and then the position of lead recovery practitioner came up and I took that post, which I then sat in for about 8 or 9 years developing that service. And now I've evolved into a paediatric resuscitation officer, which I think most ODPs have clearly shown interest in resuscitation in the past, and I've just taken it a step further. So now I work as the paed resus officer, supporting the trust in paediatric resuscitation.
So as you can see, just a slightly longer career than me in terms of experience. But this isn't just about us. Yes, we are two people who are enjoying the sounds of our own voice clearly, but we want this to be about you, the listeners. So please get in touch. We want to hear from you, ODPs, whether you be working in the theatre environment or not, to get in contact with us if you have an interesting story, maybe a funny anecdote, maybe you'd like to share some of your training or courses that you're providing at the moment, or something that's completely unique to the theatre setting, and you can do that by getting in contact with us.
So we've got 2 ways you can make contact with us. We have a Twitter account, which can be found at ODP PIPcast, and you're very welcome to drop us a tweet, and we certainly will get back to you if you've got something that you want to kind of bring to the show. And if you want to email us, then we're available on odppipcast@gmail.com.
So I think we'll get on with the main body of the show now.
This is PIPCast.
Hello everyone, welcome back. So we're going to talk now about simulation and what is it good for, and that's partly because today we're involved in quite a big simulation, Justin. A few departments involved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for the first time in a very, very long time, the Bristol Children's Hospital explored the concept of a patient coming through the multitude of services that are within the hospital that was in clear dire need, i.e. a patient that had been multiply stabbed that needed immediate surgery.
Now, stabbings don't happen all the time in Bristol, particularly to children. However, catastrophic injuries like this can and do happen. And often, because of their rarity, these aren't drilled very often, and therefore sometimes not very well, and the systems aren't necessarily in place when that happens. So a couple of months ago, we did a dry run-through of this simulation, and that was essentially to see what gaps we maybe had when we were going to run the simulation in full, which brought us to today. Yeah,
absolutely. And today was about exploring all the dynamics of a real simulation, a patient coming off a helicopter with a helicopter, in fact this time it was an ambulance, off a road vehicle with a form of pre-alert that clearly this patient was deteriorating in the ambulance. And of course it was about ensuring that it was as realistic as possible to ensure that anyone that was involved with the patient felt a sense of urgency. And it started off with clearly the patient presenting via a pre-alert through our major trauma team. Clearly it evidently triggers a major bleed like that is part of the trauma call. And so our major trauma team was activated based on the pre-alert, which then put all the wheels in motion.
From there, the theatre coordinator was activated and came down, and it was a coordinated effort between both the emergency department and the theatre department in order to assess the patient, transport them, and conduct surgery as safely but as quickly as possible to clamp the aorta and therefore gain control of the bleeding of the patient. Now this was a monumental effort, and we're both talking as if it was our baby, and in fact we have to give massive credit because we were just pawns and players in this fantastic sim, and we have to give massive thanks to doctors Dan Magnus, David Grant and Adrian Upex, who essentially brought this all together, involved with the sim centre, the emergency department and the theatre team. As you can see, you're bringing all these teams together, which is not an easy feat, but everyone was really happy to get involved. Actually,
they certainly were. I mean, I was one of the kind of sideline observers from a paediatric resuscitation point of view to look at the time, the dynamics, the teamwork, and it was really good to see how a multitude of teams that would rarely work together regularly unless a situation like this played out, and they all worked incredibly well. I mean, the human factor of the entire day when the session itself was amazing to watch and quite complex in its own right. But it was an amazing feat, and I'm quite proud to work in a team that were able to work so well together. And ultimately, no matter how much simulation was presented, I think if it was a real patient, I think everything was done absolutely fantastically well to ensure the patient didn't deteriorate and the right people were there at the right time.
So what is simulation good for? We've got a scenario here that we can go through when we're talking about this subject. I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate and say what in your opinion is the sim good for, Justin?
Well, I think like I've mentioned before, I think it from an observer it was really good to see the teams working together, and I think we were very lucky to see the simulation work very effectively. I'm very aware that you can stick a dummy in the middle of a room and say, right guys, perform, and people don't engage. But I think what was great today was that actually everything was played out as if it was real. The mannequin itself was clearly made up appropriately, and we can share a picture of that on our Twitter after the podcast today. But the entire system was put into place where a real life trauma call activation was put in place through the bleep system. Blood bank was on standby. The multitude of systems that needed to be in place were all buying into the concept, which then made the whole concept very realistic, which I think at some point people felt the adrenaline rush that you would get in a real life scenario.
Definitely. Watching the sim, I didn't participate in this one. I helped the original sim that we were doing the run through. But even this time, it was sort of like watching a TV show where you just wanted your favourite characters or whatever to do a good job, and you wanted them to do well. Not quite Grey's Anatomy, but but you felt for your colleagues who were under even a simulated stress and an immense stress. With regards to that stress, people often say one argument against simulation or training in general is there's no appetite for it. But I saw today it was a bit different. I mean, certainly we had a lot of involvement.
I think you are right, and I think both you and I have come from a different ODP education, and simulation is still seen as quite a new way of learning. But I'm pretty confident meeting students through universities, either nursing or ODP, that it's now becoming embedded within their education. And I know many universities are putting together sim labs to allow you to do appropriate simulated OSCEs and to allow you to have real hands-on experience with simulations. And I think that only enhances you in your training. However, I'm pretty confident that there is a massive amount of ODPs and other healthcare professionals that didn't have that privilege and that pleasure of having simulation at their training level. And so it is still, even now, a new concept that people are just not quite comfortable with.
Yeah, definitely. But I think what we saw today is that although some simulations are a bit hectic and people are nervous, and certainly everyone, particularly some people of not only the older either nursing or ODP generation, but we had consultant surgeons involved, and everyone was enthusiastic and taking it as seriously and as doing it as well as they could, which I think was a fantastic for showing the appetite that you probably wouldn't know is there in your own theatre departments unless you try and put one of these sims across.
Absolutely, and I think the simulation allows you to test a system. Now, both Craig and I have clearly rated this simulation as if it was the amazing thing ever. However, we're both very aware that on the debrief, which I think is incredibly essential after any simulation, that there was a very healthy conversation, and it was led by many different disciplines, from your consultant anaesthetists to your intensivists, through your nursing staff, your theatre staff, your ED staff, and they all were in one massive room, which got very hot after a period of time. That's with the joys of air conditioning in the NHS. However, there was an amazing debrief that allowed you to explore some of the dynamics and concerns that people had. And I think from that, it is now presented far more interesting components because it's now presented in learning objectives that allows you to develop the service further.
Absolutely. I mean, the one part of this sim that has been emphasised, and I think is at the emphasis of a good simulation is actually it's not necessarily about the end result for the patient, as it were. This one in was part of testing the system to see how quickly, how safely we can get our patient through the scenario, and through that, it does identify gaps, holes, problems, small things like clearing a theatre corridor, things like having 2 different types of rapid infuser in a hospital, things that you wouldn't have thought of until you get into this scenario, which I think is very important because it takes away the stigma or the fear of if you fail, if the patient dies or has an adverse outcome in a sim, it is because you have failed. I think it's important that if you are going to run a simulation, that you make sure it's used as a learning tool and certainly not a punishment tool. And that if anyone does anything wrong, then the simulation is the time to do that thing wrong or to learn from it.
I mean, I know in the early days of my career when I was learning the skills that were required to make me a great ODP, the platform that I was presented with was real life patients. I was in a room full of great ODPs and surgeons and anaesthetists and other fellow nursing staff that I was expected to perform live on a patient. And of course now with simulation it allows me to test those skills away from the patient, which is clearly only going to be in the patient's interest. But it does mean that if I do fail, then I can fail with confidence that I know that I haven't done anything wrong to the patient, and I can then come away and have a talk about it. And of course simulation is high tech, it captures everything that you do, including video links, looking at how you have performed, through to audio files, and to a degree time capturing drug administration and interventions. And I think we're quite lucky this day and age, because I know many of a company has enhanced its mannequins to allow you to capture that data. I know within the world of resuscitation, Laerdal have spent a lot of time spending the kind of sensitivity that is required for a mannequin to give you positive feedback. I think it's only then enhancing your experience.
Absolutely, there's some fantastic tech out there for those who maybe have run the budgets in a department. But actually, even if you are just a band 5, a junior practitioner, and you want to start a sim session up, if you have simply an iPhone, an iPad, and you can get a plain mannequin, which doesn't cost a ton of money, there are several apps out there. I can definitely advocate the use of one called Sim Monitor. You can use it on the iPad, but it's on the iPhone only section of the App Store. This is an app, it's very basic. You can connect 2 iPads together. It's about £8. They connect together. One is a master, one is a slave, and you can run pretty much any scenario you want from there. It has a full range of vital parameters. You can run MH scenarios, you can do different arrhythmias, and we've used it at the Children's Hospital when the Sim Centre has been otherwise used, or the equipment or the staff aren't available to help do those very high-tech sims. You still get the same result, except the feedback from your patient maybe isn't as quick, and you don't have that recorded time. But don't think you need to go ultra high tech to do a simulation. There are options out there, and we can link to some of those on our.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I think the take-home message for this is that both Craig and I have experienced a really good sim today that was very high tech, and to some points it was low tech as well. But
Absolutely.
That's what sim's all about. It's a bit of sticky tape, which is always very familiar with ODPs. We always do like a bit of sticky tape to stick things together. However, so today both Craig and I experienced a very rather large simulation that involved a lot of planning and a multitude of different disciplines. But I think what Craig said, and quite rightly so, is that all of you out there should go out and think about how can you simulate some of the critical moments within an operating department that you could simulate and test. Look at the human factors, look at your team leaders. And you don't need all the bells and whistles to allow you to do that. You can do it low key. But I think one of the most important bit from that is that you've got to have a real clear objective. Make sure you know that you're doing it for a reason, and to ensure that you keep on trend. Because there will be people that will feel they've done it wrong, but they've got to ensure that it's a learning environment and it's enhanced as positively as possible.
Welcome everyone. So we're back, and in a piece I'm going to call controversial corner.
Okay.
We're going to pick an issue of hot debate, and just talk about the issues around it. And eventually we may get guests on the show or something where we can get them to argue their arguments and go from there. But I think we both agree at least partly on this particular issue, which is that of the triple threat ODP. Yeah, there's a big issue, and different countries sometimes do it. When I worked in Wales, certainly they had their ODPs worked in generally one area, maybe 2 if you were lucky. However, you come across the borders to England, and actually a few places you can have as many as 2 or 3 specialties for your ODPs.
Let's not forget our student ODPs go through 2 years of vigorous training.
3 now?
Well, it is 3, of course. It is now evolved into 3. I'm thinking old school here. And of course, you come out with the ability to do all three skills, signed off by fantastic mentors with appropriate OSCEs and appropriate assignments. And of course, we're now met with this threat that actually you've got to choose.
Exactly. So what we want to look at is what are the arguments for and against, and we'd love to get your opinions on how you feel about the triple threat, double threat, or single master of all, or master of one ODP. So certainly where we are at Children's Hospital, we do a dual role. You can either be a scrub plus anaesthetics, or a scrub plus recovery, or an anaesthetic plus recovery practitioner. So you are covering two areas. But what you don't have the option is, which some places do, of combining scrub and anaesthetics.
Yeah.
I, for one, am a big component, as you said, about I've trained for 2 years, and I think we can. Some people say you're a jack of all trades, master of none, but I would contest that. We are a master of theatre. And what is that but all three components of the theatre journey?
But I can see the benefit of having an ODP working in just one or two areas, because it allows you to focus their learning and training, and there's an element of consistency in their staff support. How can you performance manage a member of staff that is performing not well in scrub or either anaesthetics and tarnish them with the same brush? However, like Craig, I am an ODP, and I would relish and promote the concept of making my own individual choice if I could still practice in all three areas that I came out of ODP school with. Now, I've clearly made a decision very early on in my career that anaesthetics and recovery was the two areas that I enjoyed, predominantly forced by the hand that where I first started as a brand new qualified member of staff had to make that decision, and so I was available to do either of those three jobs, but I had to choose anaesthetics at the time, and of course that's probably paved the way for my predominant interest. But looking back, I think I would have liked to have the opportunity to maintain my scrub skills. I'm clearly not competent, I think, now in my own right as a professional, that I couldn't wash my hands and stand to a table, but I think if I'd given the opportunity, I'd probably give it a go with the appropriate supports and competencies to put me back in that world. But I think ODP should have the opportunity to explore all three disciplines. But how feasible is that?
Well, that's the big issue. Certainly if you are listening to this and you are either perhaps writing a rota and bashing your head against a brick wall that is managing that rota, if you have someone that does have dual skills, they can be a help or they can be a complete hindrance. I know some places that if you have someone managing a scrub rota individually, an anaesthetic rota and a recovery rota all separately, to have people that will float between them mean that your numbers will change on a day-to-day basis, a monthly basis, weekly basis. And for that alone, I know the one way that some places manage is they either have you on a 1 monthly or 3 or 6 monthly rotation, which, if you're happy to do that, works well. I would argue that if you're doing something like a 6 monthly rotation, you're probably de-skilling over 6 months and then trying to catch back up. You're essentially playing catch up all the time.
But the purpose of this podcast is to reach out to you all. I mean, this is a perspective of me and Craig just thinking and talking about it and seeing some experience of this system working. But we'd love to hear from you. Have you got stories or examples of how you're able to maintain all three disciplines within the world of operator department practice to ensure that you feel you're able to deliver the high standard of care that all our patients expect of us? Because it is a minefield of variation out there. I mean, we all relatively have the same form of standard training with the same concept throughout those 2 and stroke 3 years now, but the end result is presented with a member of staff having to make some very difficult decisions. I think it is very individualised. I think some people can do all three at a very high standard. At what level, it's questionable, but still able to do it. And some guys, I'm very aware, that have got themselves through the course, but actually have enjoyed one specific area and decide just to play in that world. And I think it's difficult to have, right, all ODPs need to keep all three skills going, but having the option is one thing I think does lack.
Absolutely, the advantages of a multi-skilled ODP or a multi-skilled theatre team is for things such as lunch breaks. You know, you have a team that potentially can sort out each other's lunches. If a team goes down or you're lacking a certain member, you have a much better freedom to actually move people around. However, that does bring one aspect of negativity into it, which is that of not only a multidisciplined ODP, but a multidisciplined across multiple specialties. I'm sure that anyone listening here from a major trauma centre or a DGH that has a special interest in an area would probably disagree with us and say that actually having that focus of a scrub person who can do scrub across any specialty rather than a scrub and an anaesthetic person who maybe get through only a couple of specialties or one single specialty is a much better person to have. But again, we would love to hear from you if you're a coordinator of theatres, a matron, if you're someone who wants to do multi-roles and you want to find out how you can get your department to do it. You know, get in touch and if they're open to it, maybe we can get someone here to give advice on how they implemented that change in their department.
Absolutely, because I mean, one of the benefits of the concept of this PIPCast is that we share practice. Us as ODPs are experiencing different barriers routinely within our own trusts and within our own hospitals and employers. But however, there are fantastic stories shared time and time again that people have achieved stuff that most people think is quite impossible. And so this opportunity with PIPCast allows us to share some of this practice to make things happen. And of course, based on this topic, which is of course controversial, an ODP doing all three skills. How can that work? How does it work? Do you work well with all three teams? Do you all rotate? Do you just have a few people that rotate around? How does it work? And we'd love to hear from you, how you maintain your skills, but also have a really good work balance. How do you work with all the multitude of different specialities that work in all three key areas of the operating department?
Just a massive pocketbook, I'd say.
Yeah, oh my goodness me, imagine that.
Is an ODP who doesn't work in theatre anymore still an ODP?
Well, I think that's another subject for another day. And clearly, I don't work in theatres very often anymore. I clearly do my bank work to keep my hand in, but the HCPC don't denote that I have to do clinical regularly. My job within resuscitation training is enough for me to be formed as an educator, so I can continue. But I am still an ODP, and the skills that I possess, I think, crosses over beautifully into this role. But it's certainly another subject for another day. Are you still an ODP out of theatres? And again, maybe that's another subject for another day.
Let us on a postcard, tweet us.
Yeah.
That would be, fantastic.
Hello there, so welcome back. And so, both Craig and I thought it would be incredibly appropriate to explore the idea that because the PIPCast is such a new concept, that we explore and look at the history of the ODP. And we've approached a guy called Jack Paulson, who features heavily on social media when contributing to comments about ODP and the dynamics of it. And agreed to do an interview with us for our first ever podcast. And so here's a recorded interview with me and Jack.
Now, how are you, Jack? Are you all right?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good. Well, thank you very much for agreeing to take part in this today. So we've just got a few questions that if you just have a chat with us and see what you can share your amazing story. So, Jack, can you give us a brief snapshot of your experience within the world of the operating department?
Right. Well, as I said, I started after leaving the Royal Army Medical Corps, which I served 2 years in the Middle East as a combat medic.
Wow. Okay.
I always had an interest in working in theatres, and I did do some theatre work while I was there with the RAF. I worked in an Arab hospital on my own with no other English-speaking people. It's what we call hearts and minds. Then when I came out of the army, which was 1960, I applied to various hospitals within the Liverpool area to try and get taken on as an operating theatre technician, because it wasn't ODPs or ODAs then.
Right, okay, so a very different world to as it is now.
Exactly. We had to fight tooth and nail to get any kind of recognition. I was lucky in the respect that I got a job eventually at the Royal Liverpool Children's Hospital in 1962, and my boss there was Gordon Jackson Rees.
Okay.
Now, you've heard of the modified Ayres T-piece?
Yes.
The paediatric anaesthetic circuit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there's a strong connection there. So you got.
Well, Jackson Rees was my boss for 5 years.
Wow.
And of course, he backed me up completely against any interference from the hospital's secretary and right down to the matron and all the theatre superintendents. I had free rein.
Wow.
And I ran the theatres as I wished to run them.
Wow, that must have been an amazing experience, and to have such strong support, it must have been very humble.
He was the best support anybody could ever have.
Well, definitely, and of course his reputation precedes him.
Well, exactly. I mean, I learned so much from Jack Rees. I was with him on his retirement, and I went to his funeral when he died.
Wow.
And of course, you've heard of Professor Cecil Gray, who introduced curare into anaesthesia.
Wow, goodness me, yes, of course.
Because he was at the Royal Liverpool and the Liverpool University Medical School, and he used to visit Jack Rees and me in my theatres, quite often. So I was working with the top people in paediatric anaesthesia and general anaesthesia. But you see, it was the early days of open heart surgery.
Okay, right.
On children.
Yes.
And you probably heard of the Royal Liverpool Children's Hospital with the scandal that arose after taking organs.
Yes, of course. One of those things that are kind of very archived in the history books of the operating department, but we all live in hope that we've moved on from there. But I guess you had to experience it firsthand.
Well, I did, but not only that. You see, some of the guy who was responsible for taking the organs was a pathologist from Holland.
Oh, okay.
And he took the organs without the consent of the parents.
Right.
But he didn't do much with them. He just stored them in a cellar basement in the hospital.
Goodness me. Well, isn't that always the way with medical intervention? There is always a bit of a dark history to the success stories of today.
Of course, but that's how you learn.
That's right.
But, the patients were dead, and it's quite an emotive occasion when a child dies.
Yeah.
To go and ask the family, can we use their heart or their, parts of their body?
Of course. So how did you then evolve to become an ODA? Because that's kind of the next chapter.
No, I never became an ODA.
Oh, okay, lovely.
In 67,
yeah.
I was offered I was headhunted by surgical manufacturing companies who came to theatre and wanted me to work for them.
Ah, right. So a bit of company repping. So,
I came out because by this time in 67, I had one child and another one was due in 1968. And, the salaries we were on at that time were horrendous.
Right, so you needed to look for some better finance to support your ever-growing family.
Exactly. And I came out, much to my dismay, because I loved the work I was doing, but it was damned hard work. I mean, we'd start at, say, 7 in the morning. We'd still be working till 2 or 3 in the morning, especially with the cardiac cases.
Yeah, of course, because, that could be just a single case that takes all of that time.
Well, yeah, you'd be 12 hours on the operating table working the old Melrose machine, the heart-lung machine.
Yes, of course. Oh, my goodness.
Now, it's all disposable, of course. they're called perfusionists now, not heart-lung technicians.
Yes, of course. But I guess, like we said, I mean, things have evolved such a way that I think for every success story, there's been an ODP or an OTT at some point in that history. So we spoke, obviously, a couple of days ago. So you did become an ODP at some point, didn't you?
Yeah, because I was, again, headhunted by a lecturer at Manchester University, because by this time I was living in Manchester.
Okay.
Because I moved on with the surgical company that I was working for at the time.
Yeah.
And she said, I can see how keen you are. Would you not like to come back? And I said, well, at 60, I don't think anybody's going to take me on. She says, you would be very much surprised. And she evidently got in touch with the theatre superintendent at Manchester Royal Infirmary.
Yes.
And I got a call to say, would I go in?
So here
and
you
I
are.
had an interview.
So here you are, a 60-year-old with all this experience, now thinking about going back to the coalface to becoming an ODP. That must have been an amazing...
Yeah, well, I had to do a fast-track university degree course.
Right, okay, and how did you...
Over a 13-week period.
Wow, goodness me. That is fast-tracked, isn't it? But obviously you got all the skills, you just needed to brush up on what's currently modern at the time.
Well, I had 13 thesis papers to do on every subject regarding theatre work.
That must have been intense, and I guess your children have grown up at this point, but still it would have had an impact.
Well, I worked in 14 theatres in those 13 weeks.
Imagine your feet didn't stop the ground. It was going all over the place, but there you are.
Well, they then decided, I was a qualified ODP, and within 6 months I was a senior.
Wow.
And on full pay then.
Goodness me.
Proper salary scale. I was a grade 6.
Wow,
And of course...
Yeah.
When the HPC came along, the Health Professionals Council...
Yes.
I was then accepted as an operating department practitioner in 2006.
Wow, what a story! What would you say is your highlight of your time in the time that you've spent within the operating department? What would be the biggest highlight that's kind of out there that sticks out? You think that is my biggest highlight as an ODP?
The biggest highlight and challenge to me was, as I say, taking on this degree course.
Yeah.
I found it very challenging, but I worked hard and I succeeded. And to me, that was a highlight.
Yeah.
But one of the best jobs I ever had was at St Mary's Hospital in maternity. And that was where we were bringing children into the world rather than, people going out on me.
Yeah, no.
But I've done every field of surgery possible.
Wow, that's an amazing accolade to have on your mantle, to say that you've done absolutely everything going.
Well, did I tell you that I'd had a renal transplant? I'm into my 26th year.
Wow, well, congratulations. That's amazing. Oh, my goodness me, you have such a story. You've also been at one side of the operating theatre and eventually been in theatre yourself as a patient.
So, Jack, based on your lifetime within the operating department and working in the medical and surgical field, where is the most extreme location you've ever found yourself working?
Well, when I was a combat medic, I also had, working in the Arab hospital, it was my first contact with tropical medicine and surgery.
Okay. So you had, massive experience there of what was going out in the field, I guess.
Yeah, well, this is it, because we used to have the Bedouins coming in.
Okay.
They'd travel miles through the desert and they'd come to this nearest hospital in the Yemen, and they would come in with sacking wrapped around the wound, and we'd have to take the dressing off and find it filled with maggots, which preserved the limb or the wound where it was, diseased.
Yeah.
The maggots ate it and protected, what was left of the limb or whatever.
Wow, and technology like that back in the day is still used even to this moment.
Technology today is so far advanced, and yet we're still learning. And, I don't know it all, but I could still learn, today from the newcomers coming in,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There's always something new in medicine and surgery.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, even as a profession, we've grown and I'm constantly growing. There's always new achievements that ODPs are able to achieve now based on the hard work that you guys have put into our history. And I think every ODP needs to take a moment to sit back.
I'll be honest with you, Justin, it's been a hard battle.
Yes.
When you think you're working as part of a team, and certain elements are jealous of our profession and what we do, and they try to push us out. And originally the nursing people did object to ODPs or ODAs or OTTs.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think history speaks for itself. There's enough evidence to reinforce that. But I'm certainly hopeful, and I think I've been an ODP since around 2001, so I've kind of been very first-hand witness to some of that negativity that you get from some of the nursing staff. But I've also seen some work environments where they embrace the role of the ODP, and there is this kind of concept that we're all trying to achieve the same thing. We just slightly go at it a different way. And
as I said, it's teamwork. We work together.
Yeah.
We're there for the patient, not for our own personal satisfaction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is all about that patient who has that most vulnerable experience within theatre, and we're all working together. So, Jack, can you tell me, what do you think your most funniest moment, the most kind of moment that step back and you just think, oh my goodness, that's made me laugh out loud in the time that you've worked within the operating theatre?
Funniest?
Yeah, a funny story. We like a funny story.
When certain patients come in with objects stuck in certain orifices on their body.
One of those stories.
This guy was ironing naked. And
right.
he fell back, and a tin of Heinz beans went up his rectum.
As you do, Jack. I mean, that's maybe we should run a story on this podcast. What is the most funniest thing you found in patients?
Well, I mean, you really can't tell. Instead of an insulin, a spoon's used,
Yes, absolutely. Goodness me. I mean, oh my goodness. There's probably a lot of stories out there that will based on the surface, based on this chat. Oh, well, there we are. I mean, ultimately, you've had a truly amazing career, starting back in the 60s, working to where you are now, and I still can't even believe that at the age of 60, you were trying to meet the demand of being a diploma ODP. But I mean, hats off to you. Congratulations for such an amazing career, being an OTT through to being an ODP. I mean,
the thing is, I was determined. I was given the opportunity, which I didn't think I'd ever get.
Yeah.
Because I'd always missed the theatres. I was out for so many years.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I still used to go in as a surgical representative.
Yeah.
But that's not the same.
It's not the same. In fact, if anything, it makes it worse because you go in there and think, oh, I wish I could do that job.
Oh, yeah, I wish I was here.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But it was a challenge that I accepted, and I was surprised, that I came through it, to be honest.
In your time as an ODP, I mean, with all your experience, what's the one thing that you would want to tell the new generation of operating department practitioners that are entering into this very modern world?
Well, I was heavily involved with teaching, as you can imagine.
Yes.
Not in the classroom. I'm in the theatre. I'm an on-hands man. I'm not into theory. I'd rather people they learn getting their hands dirty. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I'd rather have students with me in the theatres. And the first thing I used to stress to them was, who's the most important person in here? And they'd say, oh, the surgeon or the anaesthetist. Your patient is the most important person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
you do everything in your power, and you will get some horrible, nasty, gruesome patients coming in who will try to abuse you and your other colleagues. you're handled in the way necessary.
Wow. Well, Jack, it's been amazing talking to you, and thank you very much for sharing your story. And I hope it reaches out there to lots of ODPs as an inspiring story, because I think, like I said before, I think as ODPs we should recognise the history and the challenges that you and other like-minded generated ODPs and OTTs and ODAs that have had to fight so hard for me as an ODP to do my job. Yeah, absolutely.
And for the work that we do.
It's been a hard slog.
We are professionals.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Jack. I'm going to call the end of the interview now. Thank you very much for spending your time talking to us, and we will be in touch.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to me, Justin.
Thank you.
That concludes the interview. I hope you, as the listeners, enjoyed that. It certainly was amazing to be able to talk to certainly a member of the operating theatre team that's been around a very long time that can share some amazing stories. And hopefully we will be able to talk to more of you in the forthcoming months.
This is PIPCast.
So that's it for the first ever episode of PIPCast. We hope you've enjoyed it, or at least survived it, and maybe it's entertained you on your way to work. But if not, please don't bin this recording because it's on your phone or on your computer. So we don't want you to damage any property as a result.
Absolutely not. And like Craig said, I hope you did enjoy it. It is it's been in the making for about a year, predominantly focusing on the name, but the concept and the thought behind it we know will evolve in time. But the evolution itself is completely dependent on you guys, the listeners. The world of operating department is full of you great people that we feel that if you feed into this, the show will only get bigger and better.
If you've got an idea or of something you would like covered, topics, we certainly know there are a few things we want covered. Of course, the whole upgrade, sideways grade to allied health professional status.
Enhancement, I think we should.
Enhancement.
I think we've been enhanced.
Absolutely, enhanced to AHP status. Do you know what that means? I'm not sure I know 100% of what that means. I just keep getting told that it's a good thing.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll look at that and maybe informing our student ODPs or our junior ODP colleagues as to why that is a good thing for us, what it potentially means for the future. We also want to look at other organisations that are doing things. There's CPD for ODP that are doing some really, really good things from an organic position on their Facebook page.
Yeah.
There's the evolution of the CODP, which is Unison Light or Unison controlled now. There's the AFPP and the good work that they're doing, and there's the Mystery Society of ODPs.
Yeah, I mean, we're hearing some great stuff from them, and it'll be great to hear some even more. But we're certainly going to explore the multitude of representative bodies that are available to us, and obviously accessible organisations that we can get information from. And so we're going to explore them, we're going to contact them, we're going to get them on the show, we're going to ask some questions, and we're going to bring some of that information to you. Try and answer some of those questions that you've all been asking yourself or your fellow colleagues in the coffee room, and we'll try and bring that information to you.
Absolutely. Any questions you'd like us to ask, any guests we may have on the show, or any guests you'd like to have us put on the show, and any hard questions you want to ask, please feel free to contact us. If you are open to being interviewed, to share your experience, whether you be a City and Guilds ODP, whether you be a diploma, whether you be part of the new degree level ODPs, then please get in contact with us. The addresses are, I always forget.
That's so good to ask you again, Greg. Yeah, so we're accessible in two places. Obviously, Twitter, we are available on ODP PIPCast. And of course, that's at ODP PIPCast. And of course, we've got an email address, which of course is odppipcast@gmail.com.
All the information for our contact details will be on the description of this podcast. I think they let you put a description on it.
I think they do.
We'll try and catch as many people as possible by putting cat video in the subject title. But
Just for the interest of more hits, I think.
Absolutely, as much exposure as possible. But yes, please get in touch. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time.
And thank you for listening.
This is PIPCast.